needed a theme to kind of keep me on track, otherwise I'll wander off. So I'm just showing you a before and an after of our school district. The before shows that to accommodate our ongoing growth, we had put different developments in schools that had capacity, and we needed to do a complete overhaul with the addition of the 8th elementary school. Sorry.
Chris,
all right. Sorry, I'm just trying to get. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Do you have the slides? No, they seem to be flipping.
Yeah. Okay. I'm having. Okay. So the different groups that were involved and are involved in this process include our district staff, and we kind of thought of them as the coaches. They provide factual information. The district staff are not a part of the actual decision making and help just provide kind of a genius, we used what we call kind of a genius bar during the meetings that had facts and information that people would ask about teaching and learning and others. One difficulty is the role of principals. It initially can seem very logical to include principals. They're key stakeholders in this. I have found in multiple situations where it's very hard on the principals because parents are appealing to them. Parents are asking for the principals to weigh in to keep certain groups. So it puts them in a kind of a precarious position. So it's not that it can't be done, but it's kind of a difficulty. We had a community member team. We ran application process to include folks. They were representative of the community. One of the most amazing things to watch is the type of folks that kind of tend to gravitate toward this type of group really are committed to kids in district and not necessarily looking at it for just their family or their neighborhood. I have just, every time I've done this, have found the community members to just be outstanding. And that they're going to making a decision to the board or a recommendation to the board. So if they're feeling any kind of concern that they're doing this to their neighbors or that they are causing something to happen, they really are. They're examining the data and making a recommendation to the board. The school board is the general managers, and they develop the rules, which we call the guiding principles, and they make that final decision. And they, too, have their role that's very important, but it's important to keep them distinct so that everybody kind of understands up front what their roles are. The fans are your community and your parents, and along the way, they are going to provide feedback and input. Some of those fans will be cheering for you, and some will not, maybe cheering against you a little bit. And lastly, the facilitator. That's the role that many district staff people that are listening to this are probably considering. And they're the referees. They keep the game moving along. They keep things going and try to keep folks on track, kind of not enforcing the rules, but kind of keeping people in their rules. Prior to the boundary changes, there's some really important pieces to have in place. We use GuideK12, which for our analytic and our processes with all of our information system. Prior to, or including that, we ran Census. So we send census cards out to all of our residents every year. Because we're a growing district, we really need to know when those little ones are coming up, including your current enrollment. Being aware of patterns of growth and decline in housing, being aware of the patterns in growth or patterns of growth and decline in student enrollment. Where in your district are things growing? Where are things stable? Where might things be changing? You know, a new apartment building coming in or something being, you know, renovated. One of the districts I worked in, there was a lot that had to do with the economy and employment. It was more of a seasonal farming community, and changes in the economy ran differently there than they might in the city. Other types of demographic data, helpful voter records and things like that help you know the age of your community. Having some established class sizes or targets so that you understand, I'm not sure what that is. Class sizes are targets so that you have some basis that you can study the capacity of your building. And that's the next thing. How many students fit in your building? And that may sound really simple, but it can be, even that can be somewhat controversial. It's not necessarily how you use your building, but how you can fit, how many students would typically fit, whether that's using an 800 square foot classroom. You can use targets or ranges. Buildings are somewhat elastic, how you can use them and how you should use them, and in some cases how you have to use them, maybe different numbers. And figuring that out in advance is somewhat important, because the difficulty when you move people out is if there's information available that says that they could fit in the building, they're going to say, well, why do I have to leave? There's still room. So kind of thinking through what those building capacities are in advance. And then if there's any transportation parameters, if you have special rules about who pays or who doesn't pay, distances, length of time on the buses.
Good idea, all right? Make them pay.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
For us, using GuideK12, we developed neighborhoods, which was an ability to move cohorts of families together and not have to look at it individually. These are, for us, are based on areas that we typically would not let kiddos cross the road, so that it would not kind of make the neighborhood, and allowed us to kind of chunk groups together as we moved them. The other thing that we built in GuideK12, there are different layers that you can build. Yes, ma'am.
Kristin, this is Julie, just to interrupt. If I could just ask everybody to mute their phones. We're getting a little bit of background sound, and it's a little disruptive. So if everybody can just mute their phones, it'll improve the audio quality for everybody. Thank you.
Thank you, Julie. GuideK12 allows you to build layers. So as I showed in the previous slide, neighborhoods is one of the layers that we built. Another layer that we built in advance of the boundary changes was areas of growth. So what you can see here in yellow are some basic areas we, after talking with our different cities, that we expected growth to be pretty substantial. It really helps you visualize as you're building attendance areas where those numbers and where those students, future students, would be filling into. The other data that we built into our system in advance was that census. This is a diagram of where all of our birth through 4-year-olds reside in the district. And again, what it allows you to do as you look at your boundaries is to look at that 0 to 4 age range to see if they play out moving forward. So as I said, the district I work with in southern Minnesota, after we finished our boundaries, we did a double check and we reran the boundaries with children ages 0 to 4 to see if that would essentially hold true for 5 years. And so this can be a very useful set of data to review. Class management. It is probably one of the things that seems intuitive but can be really hard to keep an eye on. So allowing enough time in the beginning to set up a time frame for each phase. And some of it can be done in advance, as I showed with GuideK12. You can build different layers that you may think will prove useful as you move along. Building time for the committee work that allows for learning and developing the scenarios, but a short enough time that it can stay confidential. As you know, it's an emotional thing. So we had about 25 community members that worked for 3 Thursdays back-to-back in a group. And then we had some further meetings after that, but that was the period of time where it was intense and we were very focused on actually working in GuideK12. It allowed them to kind of build a community and have each other to bounce out ideas off of. And it also then didn't spiral out of control with people, different community or different folks hearing rumors or that type of thing. Input, we really believed in both a transparent process, but then an opportunity for feedback. please set up in advance a system to collect input from our community members for a defined period and a way that they could do it both verbally, or we used a website where they could type in their comments. Keeping an eye on school breaks, the school board meeting schedule, so that you're creating a momentum towards your decision and don't have unnecessary lags that might kind of just derail the process. The rules. The rules are the guiding principles, and you may say, well, that's an obvious, that seems kind of obvious, and that's nice, but we wouldn't want to spend too much time on that. I would share that the guiding principles may be the most important step, and what is listed on your guiding principles may be as important as what is not listed. Thinking through them, that you're going to be committed to them for several months, and they're going to guide work, and they're going to guide decision making. And the next line, when each guiding principle has an equal and opposite reaction, and I don't mean to sound negative in the least, but you may say something that seems very common sense oriented. We're going to create neighborhood schools. Every parent will expect them to attend the school that's closest to them, even if that's not humanly possible, or even if they are 0.5 miles from one school and 0.6. Parents will use that if they're feeling emotional and feeling like they want to stay at their school. That guiding principle really can be used to support your decision, but can also be used to kind of pull it apart, if that makes any sense. So it's human nature, and it's the parent's job to advocate for their kiddos, and each one of those guiding principles really needs to be thoroughly thought through. Some possibilities to consider: transportation costs and time. Parameters, if you have to do transfer stations, or you do city kids and then country kids, or have a certain amount of time that you're allowed to have kids on the bus, students on the bus. If you're considering socioeconomics and trying to have balanced schools, if you're examining test scores, if you would grandfather in siblings. Grandfathering is when you allow perhaps the 4th or 5th graders to finish out their time in the elementary school. Sometimes you have that ability. Sometimes based on capacity or the number of students you're moving, that isn't an option. Swing neighborhoods. This was something we examined that meant that there may be a neighborhood that's between two schools that the amount of students is not an extraordinary number, and if they could choose, you could easily run a bus for each elementary school through, and you could allow personal choice. Legacy neighborhoods, that's a term we used for ourselves. It just is an acknowledgement that there may be neighborhoods that have had long-standing history in a certain school. That doesn't mean that you need to have it as a guiding principle. It just may be a consideration. High-impact neighborhoods, and those are areas where you may have a significantly unique population. Either it's extremely dense, maybe a townhouse development, or it may be a housing development that has, a lot of folks from one community or another. Those are high-impact neighborhoods. We have one small neighborhood that had 130 students, and wherever I had when I was working in GuideK12, whenever I moved that neighborhood to a school, it would skew it above the capacity. And after doing several scenarios by myself, I realized that neighborhood almost had to be assigned first and then work around that. So just knowing where those high density neighborhoods might be. And then also whether you would want to consider walk and biking areas, if you have those. And because many families that may or may not want to leave their closest school will share that they always walk and bike to school, and that's of high value to them. It may or may not be depending on your community. Additional considerations might be the grade configurations. If your school board or your teaching and learning department says that you are a K-5 middle school and high school school, great. Other districts are comfortable having some schools that may go through 6th grade. If that's anything that the group can consider, or if it's going to stay status quo. Feeder schools are when an entire elementary school feeds to a middle school or junior high. Prior to our last boundary changes, we had schools that were split, and one of our values this most recent time was to create feeder schools so that all fifth graders went to middle school as a group. If there is any negotiating or any discussion about program location, if you have a language immersion or special education specialty program, if those are allowed in the mix for the group or if those are to remain status quo. And then lastly, does your school board prefer multiple scenarios that they can review? Are they looking to your task force to come up with a single unified consensus recommendation? So again, those guiding principles can really be tailored to meet the needs of your community, and I would not be at all concerned if it took 2 or 3 meetings with the school board and versions of it to get to a place knowing that this is going to guide a lot of decisions and information for several months. So what we found to be really beneficial was working with our Citizens Committee, was developing some, different scenarios for them to learn about how attendance boundaries might work. Initially, everyone can look at a map and say, well, if I just move these kiddos here and we move these families here, we should be fine. It's really, as everyone knows, a much more complicated endeavor than that, and especially if you want these boundaries to last a significant amount of time. So we set up several meetings. The first meeting was learning work. This is where we shared with our committee a lot of background information. Capacity of our schools. We had someone from our transportation department come in and do a 15-minute overview of transportation and drive time. We had staff from our teaching and learning department talk about our grade configuration. So that was a real background. First meeting was a lot of learning work. Then we had multiple meetings where our citizens worked in small groups. We were lucky that we had 3 folks that could operate GuideK12, and so they work in small groups to each develop independently scenarios and wrestle through it, and then came back as a large group and refined the scenario and talked through how to get to consensus. In between each one of these meetings, the experts, the staff, were preparing additional information for the group. So they might say, I'd like to know how many houses are coming in this area, or we'd like to know the timing of this development. And so in between the weekly meetings, staff are working feverishly to seek information or find clarifying data to help them continue in their process. The staff the community members are very empowered when they can sit down and move neighborhoods back and forth. And GuideK12 does allow that, or does facilitate that. So we would have families or groups that would be working and saying, please move this neighborhood to this school. Oh, that makes it too full. Can you move it back? And they really got to dig in and work hands-on in that process. The system, such as GuideK12, a geo-visual analytics tool, allows, as I said, for the committee to work with current data. That's very important. Picking a snapshot of what data set you're going to use is important so that it stays consistent through the process. It allowed the data to be reviewed and reported instantly, so there are reports that you could print out that allowed groups to immediately look at capacity or impact on socioeconomic or racial qualities. Small groups were able to work independently and come back together, kind of defend their process or their decision. And then we were able to develop multiple scenarios and look at ways to tweak it in between large group meetings. As you get to the end, so we had our group, they did their learning work, they did their small group development, they worked together in a large group where they were able to bring their 3 scenarios to consensus, and they brought it to the school board for recommendation. At that point, I characterized the next few weeks or week or so as the 2-minute warning. It's a crucial time period where you now have put this recommendation out for public input, feedback. it's really easy at that point to want to stop. And I don't mean that you don't have the fortitude, but there's going to be a lot of pushback from parents that don't want to move the schools, which is understandable. It's also very easy to lose focus on your guiding principles and start to take into account new data or new considerations. So, for example, perhaps walk and bike routes was not a priority in the guiding principles. You were looking at transportation and long-term capacity. And then parents start providing feedback that they want their children to be able to walk to school. It's very hard not to start to react to that. And so that's when you almost are tempted to feel like you want to stop and start over again. I say this lovingly, a small number of fans can make a lot of noise. You can have neighborhoods or groups of neighborhoods or parents that don't want to leave their school, which is understandable, that can make a lot of, give a lot of feedback and make a lot of fan noise. It's sometimes hard as you're reviewing the feedback from community members. Of course, you want to hear feedback that is valid, that maybe points out a blind spot or something that the committee may have missed. It's very hard to look at the concerns and immediately know whether those are motivated by just a fear of change or if it's really a valid concern. So spending time looking at those really objectively and trying as best as you can to not go into an emotional place with those concerns. And as a district employee, you always want to respond to community concerns, but being mindful that you really don't want to undo what the committee has done. If they have followed the process and with fidelity and followed the guiding principles from the school board with fidelity, a desire to respond to concerns is really valid, but it really can't undo the committee work, and that's hard. So to engage your community after the guiding principles have been agreed upon and they've provided their recommendation, having that place for the community to provide that input, having that ready ahead of time. The other thought, as many of you may know, is there are, with email, parents that have a concern will send the same email to the school board, to principals, to the committee. And initially, everyone's responding to multiple emails. So really, one thing that we found is having a system for who's going to reply to the email so that you aren't consumed for 2 weeks with copy and paste kinds of emails. You definitely want to respond to community input and community feedback, but the manpower it may take to respond to email blasts that go to 25 people and then are copy and pasted by 25 more people can be overwhelming. So deciding who's going to respond to which emails is important. And new things that we found, neighborhood Facebook pages where they were sharing information. Any information that you share that is public information, you can assume that parents can find other sources. We had parents that were very knowledgeable going to the Minnesota Department of Education and looking at data. And that's certainly their role in advocating for their family, is that it can be overwhelming to the staff to try to respond to all the different kinds of data that are coming back at them. So once the decision's made and you've wrestled with the input and you've had the fortitude to go through to a decision, you may think that you can breathe a sigh of relief and say, good job, team, we're done. Probably the most surprising fact for me was that our school board made a decision at 9 o'clock at night, and the next morning families were calling and wanted immediate answers. Am I going to that new school? Is my daughter's friend going to that school? When will the orientation activities be? Will they change the school start times? Do they have a carnival or do they do a sock hop? All those things that are really important to families. I was very, very surprised at the expectations that was all pre-planned, even though up until then it had been a transparent process that had no decision had been made. So families will want to know their new school, where their friends are attending. So being prepared with GuideK12 School Search or online math is very important, and it can be hard for the staff to turn that around as fast as parents would like it. So just a quick instant replay, having strong, consistent data, and I don't think I highlighted that as much in the beginning, but setting data points and setting the information that you're using to keep consistent messages is very important. So that's strong, consistent data, developing with your school board guiding principles that everyone is supportive of and can rally around for several months, having defined roles and objectives for each part of the group, whether it's the school board, the principals, the committee, or the community. And then just developing the timing and decision-making schedule so that you can create a tempo that brings you to conclusion that doesn't cause you to feel rushed, but on the other hand doesn't leave lots of lag time where things may kind of fall off the railroad tracks a little bit. For us in the Wayzata schools, these are we did not include this in our previous webinar, but people had asked, these are the 11 guiding principles that we used. They work for our district at that time. They may or may not be ones that we would use again, but as I shared, each of those can be used to support or defend certain things. It is nearly impossible to have all 11 guiding principles work for all 11,000 children. And that was, parents would, if they didn't want to leave a school, would find one of those guiding principles that didn't work in their family's case and bring it to your attention. So just knowing that it's really, they're guiding principles and not hard and fast rules, because it's very difficult in every situation to obtain all of those. So I think with that, I would be happy to answer any questions that anyone would like to ask.
This is Harry Fix from Lake County Schools. Hello?
Hello, jump in.
Hi, hey, this is Harry Fix from Lake County Schools. I'm sorry I got started in listening a little later than I wanted to. First off, I appreciate your presentation, and it goes along with a lot of the things that we've done here and what I've done in Palm Beach County. But one of the things that I wanted to ask you about is I had to do this via phone because my computer's a mess. But anyway, those 11 guiding principles, were those specific to this specific boundary change, or do you use those each time, or do you modify them based on whatever the needs might be of that attendance boundary change?
Thank you for the question. The school that we just opened this past fall was the first one we'd opened in 20 years. So this was a very new process for our school board and our community. It's highly likely that we will need another school in the next few years. And so I can't answer for the school board if they would use these again or refine them. They were for our community at that point. We would definitely go through them again and see if they still hold true whenever we do this again.
I see, and that makes sense. Down here in Florida, we go through the attendance boundary process, I hate to say sometimes yearly, but at least every 5 years. But I think one of the things that I haven't been successful with is getting my board to agree up front to some guiding principles. And I don't know if it's because they just don't want to be hamstrung or whatever, but the problem is when you're dealing, just as we would deal with an ad hoc committee pulled together to deal with that attendance boundary change, if you don't, and we, as planners, we have some idea of what we're going for, but to deal with a board that basically is inadvertently, if you will, telling you, well, we'll know it when we see it, that's quite frustrating.
And I would agree. I have found that the guiding principles, as I said in the webinar, I did this with another school district in southern Minnesota, their guiding principles were very different. They have a different population with some different needs, and they really were striving to have socioeconomic and racial balance nearly exactly the same across their 3 elementary schools. And certainly 3 schools is different to balance than if you had 15 or 20 elementary schools. But they had a very different set of community priorities, which it was wonderful to work with, and it was interesting. But they too, they were very good, and I agree with you. I think if you don't have those guiding principles up front, it's very hard for community members or a committee to not take everything into consideration. You somewhat need to take some variables off the table to get to some kind of conclusion.
Agreed. Thank you.
Thank you for the question. Any other questions or comments? You can write them in on the chat box, or you can just jump in.
If I can ask another one while we're waiting on people, then?
Sure.
Once again, I got tuned in a little later. When we did attendance boundary changes in South Florida, down in Palm Beach, we were under an agreement with the Office of Civil Rights with respect to, at that time, with respect to racial balance and so on. Was any of that the case in these attendance boundary changes?
We have a little bit of we did review with both the Minnesota Department of Education and some legal decisions that we would adhere to all, federal and state laws. We did not have anything specific that we needed to do. We were just conscious of not wanting to exacerbate or create any kind of racially isolated school. Other than that, beyond that, we didn't have any other overriding issues that we needed to contend with.
Okay.
Now, I'll jump in on that. We have had many districts across the country that have used GuideK12 and done boundary changes, and that's one of the things that has been very beneficial, is they'd be able to look at a variety of factors and any characteristics of the student body, and quickly understand the scenario and how it pertains to some of those restrictions or laws. In fact, Kristin, I'm just going to throw something back to you that you had talked about is when you were doing your analysis of which neighborhoods to move and which neighborhoods to move into which schools, you had been able to identify that there were certain neighborhoods that would swing your demographics so much one way or the other that they would become unbalanced. Am I saying that correctly? Where you had identified some key neighborhoods that you needed to be careful with?
Yes, that is absolutely correct. There were key neighborhoods that either by density, that they had a lot of, in a small area had an extraordinary number of children, or that it was a dense, a smaller area that may have a unique characteristic that, folks from a certain area or a certain part of the world, landed together there. And so by flipping them to one school or flipping to another, depending on what other neighborhoods might be in that, could really change the demographics of a particular school. And then with the school district that I worked with in southern Minnesota, that was one of their guiding principles. So as we developed every scenario, we would stop and print the reports on racial and socioeconomic breakdown of each school, scenario A and the 3 schools, scenario B, and we print them on big posters and put them in a room as we would work on things. So definitely the reporting ability you can do on all the scenarios. You can stop partway through and see if you're getting closer to balance or moving further away based on your decision. GuideK12 also has a graph along the bottom that helps you look at capacity. And that was something we used to call it, there's a power line we used to call it. It was the line across the graph that would show if your schools are going over capacity. And that you can have up as you work in real time. And that also helped the committee see the implications of changes, as you'd see that it would trigger a school to go suddenly way over capacity or way under capacity.
Any other questions? All right. Well, I appreciate the questions. And Kristin, I can't thank you enough for sharing all that you have shared today. We do have additional articles. Oh,
hello.
Here's a question. Go ahead.
Yeah. This is Scott Hare from Shakopee.
Hi, Scott.
Hey, we put a couple questions in the chat, and I'm not sure we're doing that right, but it was, I'll just read them off then. How long was the process start to finish in Wayzata? How did you get accurate birth to 4 data in the system? And how did you get student ride times on the bus?
Well, we'll start with the easy one. The census, we send a census card to every district address every fall. And we did not have, we did not have solid data several years ago, but we have now done the census cards out about the last 5 years, or even maybe a little bit longer. So we feel really good about our birth to 4-year-old data. It really now helps us predict our kindergarten size and to know which school our kindergartners are going to arrive at. So we have found that invaluable. It is a bit of manpower to review that, but it's allowed us to be a little bit ahead of the curve. The process, the length of the process, we worked with our community members. We started right before the holidays. We gave them some information. We met through January and early February. Then it went to a work session, public input, and I think we got to final school board approval with the work session, and then school board approval by the end of May, early June. And then we did that one entire school year in advance. We had the luxury of having that lead time. So we had them done in June, and then they did not take place for 14 months. So it allowed us a year of prep.
But you did it with, you had some big work time in there, but under 5 months, the whole thing.
Yes. Yep. Yes. And I'm sorry, Scott, I can't remember your third question.
Bus ride times, does the system calculate that, or is that something you had to load? How did that work?
Oh, thank you. Our transportation director and our busing contractor both served on the committee with us. So as I said, we had community members, and then we had our staff resources along the side that didn't participate but were there to answer questions. So all along, our transportation director and our contractor would take our attendance boundaries back and during the week and kind of analyze them with rough drive times. So we would be able to see if we were making them better or longer.
And then, sorry, I do have one other question, and that is, within GuideK12, would it allow you to easily get statistics like the percentage of kids that will wind up in a new school with this change?
Yes. Yes, you can very easily. It'll show you how many are affected. And we use that actually to notify parents that they were being affected. We did it out of GuideK12. So you can very easily kick that information out to a spreadsheet. You can eliminate your 5th graders because they're going to go to middle school, so that's something different. You know, it helped us so that we could do letters right out to folks letting them know that they'd be affected.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great. And there are additional, the complete story that Kristin, her complete case study is out on GuideK12 under our resources tab, as well as some other recent boundary success stories as well. Did anybody else submit it in the chat? I wasn't seeing them. If there's any other questions.
Hey Julie, I'm Thomas from San Francisco Unified, and I did put a couple of questions there in the chat. I can read them if you don't.
Yeah, I'm not seeing them, so please, please go ahead.
Yeah, well, the most, I guess, important for me is how do you compare your system, your product with ArcGIS mapping software, since that's what we're using here, and you know, if we ever going to do a change, obviously I want to see the advantage of your system.
Yeah, that's definitely a good question, and we get that question quite a bit. And you know, a couple of big differences are that we're a web-based tool, and that it's a very intuitive tool. Like ArcGIS, that really requires a specialist that understands the software and is trained on the software. GuideK12, a team of administrative users can be trained in one day, and really, like in this case of Wayzata, they'll have a user working with the public, and the public actually, if they're working on attendance boundaries, sometimes those parents get trained too. So it's a very intuitive, easy-to-use tool, and you can have an unlimited number of users per the district, within the district. So it really is meant to be a much broader reach than an ArcGIS tool, and we make it a lot easier to add different data sets and analyze everything from boundaries is the one that we're talking about today, but it's easy to add voter history for levies and referendums. You know, they were talking about birth data, all of those kinds of things. So yeah, I'd be happy to walk you through kind of all the ArcGIS differences with our technical team, who is very well versed in all the ArcGIS software.
That's good. And yeah, since it's online based, my other question was, you know, how secure it is, since we're updating, you know, student database and, you know, that's sensitive information.
Yes, and yeah, we can walk through all of those, but yeah, security is a top priority for us, and student privacy as well. And so it is cloud-based, and we work with Amazon, and so we've got kind of the highest security standards in the industry, and work. Again, our technical team could answer kind of the more specific security questions, but that's something that we take great pride in. Any other questions that we were not seeing in the chat room? Thank you all for your participation. I will be sending the PDFs of these slides, and we have recorded the session as well if you would like to share it with others. So thank you again, and please let me know if you have any questions or concerns. Again, thank you, Kristin. I really appreciate you being here.
Thank you, Julie. Have a great afternoon.
You too. Have a great afternoon, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.